Good evening, everyone, and welcome this evening to the ILSS webinar on the topic Shifting Gears, Empowering Corporate Leaders for Social Impact. My name is Rajneesh Chaudhary, and I head the Center of Excellence for Leadership at ILSS. We have an amazing and exciting panel to talk to us today, this evening. I would like to move on to the agenda of today's webinar by introducing the panel that we've got. We've got Ashish Dhawan, who has provided the keynote address for this evening. Unfortunately, due to a last-minute commitment, he's unable to be here live, but we recorded a video yesterday of Ashish, which we're going to play. Ashish is the founder and chief executive officer of the Convergence Foundation, and he had also founded the country's leading private equity firm, which is Swiss Capital. Then we've got Aakanksha Gulati, and Aakanksha is the chief executive officer of ACT Grants. And in the past, she was the chief program officer for Teach for India and consultant at BCG Group. And ACT Grants really enables innovation for tech-enabled solutions in the social sector. And last but not the least, we have Tarun Cherukuri, who needs no introduction. He's a co-founder and CEO of Indus Action, 2019 Obama Foundation Fellow, and also been a Fulbright Fellow in the past, for us to talk about the need for young leadership in the social sector. Before we come to the exciting panel, I would request Apeksha to play for us the keynote that Ashish has provided for us to understand the overview of where the sector is moving and why investing in leadership at a middle level is so crucial for us.
I'm sorry that I can't be there in person to be with you or do this live. I have to be in Calcutta on Wednesday, so my apologies. But let me start by saying that I'm really excited that all of you will consider ILSS and its new program. India provides a huge opportunity to do a lifetime of work to drive change, to help achieve these SDGs, not only 2030, but by 2050, to ensure that really India is like a developed country, not just in terms of economic development, but also in terms of the social infrastructure, in terms of the quality of life that people have, and the opportunities that people have to live a better life. So the context there, one is where India has this vibrant social sector. India has a government that is very committed to development. India has private sector actors because we need markets in certain cases also to work. So unlike Africa, which is far behind, I think India has made a lot of progress. So anybody looking at this sector now comes in at a point in time where some of the hard work has been done, but lots of work needs to be done the next 20-25 years to achieve the goals that we need to achieve. If you look at the sector itself, it's very diverse. There's a set of small community-based orgs that work at very, very small scale, individual-led, and that's why you read the statistics sometimes that India has 2 million NGOs, because it's someone literally in their neighborhood doing some work. It's like a nanopreneur doing work. And then you have slightly larger orgs that raise money, that have some scale, that work on implementation. It may be in their block, district, state, what have you. They could be doing implementation work in education, health, whatever the domain may be. And we've heard of many orgs. Some have grown up to fairly large scale, like Akshay Patra works on midday meals and now serves more than 2 million children a day. A hot meal, nutritious meal every day. Pratham has worked on education for over 25 years. Educate Girls, who works on the girl child, for a long period of time, over a decade. Orgs like Teach for India have really supplied talent to the social sector. And you have many other organizations, Pradhan, that have worked on, rural development and empowerment. So we have a vibrant social sector and lots of organizations working on, implementation in India. Government also is a very important actor in development. In India, government spends about 9% of GDP, almost $300 billion on the social sector across education, health, livelihoods, benefits. So you've seen many of these missions, these big programs of government to reach out to all citizens. And I think the big change in India is that delivery by government has improved quite dramatically. And which is why, clean water now can reach more of our citizens, improved sanitation, food rations are actually reaching people, Jan Dhan account for all, etc. And these have happened in the last decade. Technology has been a great enabler. I think without technology, we may not have been able to achieve some of these goals in terms of tracking, making sure service delivery happens, etc. But having an engaged government that is committed to doing this is really, really critical. And then a lot of organizations supporting government in this endeavor as well. And a lot of youth have really joined government to make this happen. So government's a big actor. I would say another new form of org that's emerged is orgs that are working more systemically to support development. So working at scale in supporting the development across areas. So unlike doing ground-based implementation work, really partnering with government as a technical partner, as a project management partner, to make sure you go and government delivers at scale. So partnering with government. And we've identified probably 80 odd orgs in India now that are working much more systemically, and those deliver very high return on investment, ROI, in a philanthropic sense, because you can really impact at scale and it's sustainable as well. And I think for young people, that's something to consider as well. So there is a vibrant ecosystem of service providers also, people who provide technology, technical inputs, measurement and evaluation in this sector as well. So robust set of opportunities for anybody entering this sector across various areas where you can contribute and make a difference. As far as the opportunities are concerned, or the talent pipeline, there are a lot of young people in this sector. I think thanks to fellowship programs, thanks to greater awareness, I think a lot of the youth in India want to join the social sector. People in their early 20s who are frankly very well qualified. I've seen at the top 100 colleges, universities in India, many students say, I really want to pursue a career in the social sector. I've seen it directly at Ashoka University, where almost 15-20% of our students opt for jobs in the social sector. So it's no longer a stigma. I think it's something where if somebody is passionate, wants to make a difference, they're taking the plunge at a very young age. So we have a robust set of people in their early 20s, mid 20s in this sector, and much better talent than we had 10 years, 15 years ago. I think what we're really missing is this middle management, because the sector has not been able to grow middle management to the same extent. Any org that's small doesn't have the leadership development capability. And to now manage projects, you need project management capability, you need people who can lead teams, people who will also end up becoming future leaders of these organizations. So middle management has sort of been the big missing layer in these organizations. And there is a need not just for homegrown talent from within the sector, but also for talent with diverse experience, particularly experience in the corporate sector, to come in to the social sector. We've seen that leaders who come in, more senior ones, ILSS's flagship program that started really as a leadership program, has taken people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and really moved them into leadership positions, board positions in the social sector. I think this next initiative to really move people into the middle management and to grow the middle management rank is going to be equally important, because this will help organizations deliver at scale and really build their capability, make them more professional, etc. So I feel that this is the sector has improved a lot in terms of being more professional. The sector has better opportunities today. There are lots of good organizations that top 500 organizations in the sector are reasonably good places to work. The ones that work systemically are even more organized in terms of places to work. And so people making the transition will find it easier sometimes to go into these organizations and find that they have a peer group who is as qualified. So you're in a surrounding environment that the job may be different. It's not for profit, but you don't feel like you have taken a step down to come into the sector. There's also greater focus in the social sector on career development. I think people realize that when folks join the sector, they want to develop themselves as well. They want to build project management capability. They want to build their leadership skills. So if I look at the top 500 social sector orgs, they are making a greater investment in HR and org development because they realize that without talent they can't achieve what they have to do, and they have to groom the talent, as it were. So greater focus on L&D as well, learning programs, because people are in the sector, they want to learn more and develop themselves. So I think as a professional joining the sector, there's an opportunity to be a part of a good peer group, to really take on a meaningful role, to manage people, to actually upgrade one's skills, to end up in a leadership position in the sector over a period of time, and to feel really proud about the impact that you're driving, on a day-to-day basis. So I'm a big believer that there's a huge supply-demand gap. We need lots of talented people in middle management, and this shift is just starting to begin. So if you're early on with the trend, you will capitalize and benefit, from this. So I would really encourage people to look at the sector very seriously now. Talk to people who are young, much younger than you sometimes, and ask them about the sector, because they will have a very different perspective than your peer group sometimes. People in the old days I used to find were jaded about the social sector. That's not the case anymore. I think the whole mahal, the whole branding of the sector has changed. So it's the right moment, the right opportunity for you. I would now like to pass it on to Rajneesh. He's the expert, he leads the center here at ILSS, and he can really talk much more about ILSS's new program that really focuses on the middle management program or for mid-career professionals, which I think will be a game changer in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish, for the kind keynote recording. And that really helps us to set the context for the remaining of the discussion. I would like to begin by once again thanking Tarun and Aakanksha for making time in the middle of their extremely busy schedules. So thank you for that. I would like to open, before we open to the audience, I was just being curious about a few questions. My first question to you would be, you were both crossovers from the private to the social sector. What was your personal experience and journey? And more than that, I'm interested to know what were the skills that you thought were relevant, and what more did you have to do to hone up and brush up to be more relevant in the social sector? So let's go with Akanksha before I come to Tarun.
Okay, I'm used to being role number one, so I can start. Yeah, I think my crossover, interestingly, is what I call, it was both gradual, but it was also very sudden. And I'll share what I mean by that. I think just this notion of, doing something in the impact space, especially in education, teaching, learning, was something that I think was deeply rooted from a very young age. And again, you never know what really, started that. But I think I can go back to, things like my grandmother, as early as we were 3 or 4 years old, for our birthday, would always donate some money to a charity and we would spend the day there. I had a bad reputation even as a 7-year-old. I have two sisters and lots of cousins who would say, "Run away, Aakanksha's coming. She's going to start teaching us." Because I was just really fascinated with how kids learned, and every day, I would come back from school and try to recreate a classroom at home. And that kind of just was a very consistent thing in my life. But, I also resonate deeply with what Ashish was saying. 10, 15 years ago, the stigma attached was very real. So as a 5-year old, if I would say I want to become a teacher, my parents would say, yeah, that's a great profession, you should. By the time I became 10, they were saying, maybe not a teacher, maybe you want to become a professor. And by the time I went to college, it was like, you're smart, you're good at studies. Why would you, even talk about this teaching? And so the stigma was very real. But I think there was something inside me that didn't let go. And so, even as I was pursuing my mathematics and economics degree in college, which is what my parents knew, on the side, I also did get my teaching certification, taught for a whole year in my 4th year, was trader by day in New York, but by night was, running a small not-for-profit organization, went to business school, and again was part of every single social impact club that I could find. So I think somewhere, the seed was always there, but didn't have the conviction because the surround sound was very much, telling me that, hey, you should do what all the other, academically smart kids are doing. Which is what I did. I kind of checked all those boxes and worked in finance, got an MBA, worked in strategy consulting at BCG. And then I say it was really abrupt because, and again, thanks to Ashish, I remember BCG had this town hall and Ashish was invited as a speaker. And he spoke about, this was very early days of, I think, Central Square Foundation was just getting started. And he shared his journey of how, he started in finance and now was, had this big vision of building something in education. And then, I kind of started talking to more people in the sector, whoever I could find, cold calling. And very soon, I think just a few months later, went to work one day and said, I have to quit. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll just figure it out. And so that was about 9 years ago and haven't really looked back since. So it was sudden because I think up until that point, I was saying, okay, maybe like I'll do this later, or, there'll be a perfect time or something will happen that'll give me a sign that now is the right time to move into the sector. But I think my learning really was you kind of have to be in the driver's seat of your journey. And so the right time is whenever you decide is the right time. And so in that sense, it was very abrupt. I'll quickly address some of the points on skills. For me, at least, Rajneesh, the skills that I've leaned heavily on from my, first half of my career have been more horizontal in nature. So while I worked as a trader, all the structuring of mortgage-backed securities, like it wasn't the technical skills, and I realized that very early on, that was not obviously transferable. But I think, especially consulting, everything from problem solving, thinking strategically, managing teams to outcomes, stakeholder management, relationship building. So a lot of these were skills that were very quickly transferable. And so that is not to say, though, that the sector also does not provide room for very, very technical skills. So technology, especially over the last 5 years and now in my role at ACT, huge need, so if you are someone who likes solving tech problems, I guarantee you can solve some very, very interesting problems in the sector. Marketing, social media, branding. I think the whole sector has had to really work on its branding as a whole. But it's an incredibly important need to really shine light on the causes that we're working on. So again, I think it's not necessarily that only your cross-functional skills are important or technical, but I think there's room for all of that today, given just how much the sector has changed over the last 10 to 15 years. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Akanksha. That was really helpful. You're talking about people skills, problem solving, branding, etc., which are required, and the kind of skills that you and people from the private sector can bring in. Tarun, would love to hear about your perspectives and your journey as well.
Thank you, Rajneesh, for having me here, and congratulations to ILSS for launching this very important program. So, yeah, happy to kind of share my experience and like build on where Akanksha left about the seed is always there. So, I want to kind of pick on that thread. So, I actually want to make an argument that the seed is actually there in our culture. So, I was thinking about 2,500 years ago, and Gautam Buddha's story. The first instance he saw, an episode of suffering, he kind of crossed over. So he had all the, capital, royalties, endowments, and he could have lived a rich, luxurious life as a prince, a king, lording over his subjects. Which is the first, I guess, touch with suffering that activated something, within him. And then, of course, we kind of, we know kind of the story after that. Really wanted to get to the root of suffering. And I guess fast forward, if you look at our freedom movement as well, like all the people who sacrificed their lucrative careers as lawyers, as aristocrats, to put everything on the line so that we can have our political freedoms. So I guess it's what we've inherited in many ways. So it's definitely the seeds go back to our great grandparents and kind of our ancestors. So with that, of course, very similar to Akanksha, I think the seeds were always there, growing up. But you kind of you check off the box in engineering. I did, chemical engineer as well. Check off the box with landing your first corporate job. So, made jams, ice creams, and ketchup for Hindustan Unilever. So obviously, a prized, landing for anybody doing chemical engineering, out of engineering school. I really enjoyed my job, and I guess it's about a certain moment where suddenly I get the altruistic bone, comes to life. So it was not a act per se. Like I've always kind of interfaced with the reality of inequity in school. You also no matter how much French windows you have in your Mumbai apartment, I couldn't kind of look beyond the fact that my life is very radically different from just children outside me, and it was just actually a random lottery that I won. So never did I think even growing up as well, I didn't think that I was self-made. I knew a lot of circumstantial luck landed me, in that French window apartment and a Hindustan Unilever job in South Mumbai. So the angst was always there, saying that look, I don't understand these two Indias. I'm clearly having my life, international travel, managing big brands, obviously the company to be in. So that angst really grew on me, and I guess two events really kind of accelerated my crossover. Much more spontaneously. I didn't plan for it. It was just angst which took over me. So it was about 100 days between kind of a micro event, losing my maternal grandmother, who I was very close to. She kind of brought me up. And then a macro event 26/11, which affected Hindustan Unilever in a very direct way. So my skip manager to Paul Polman, who was CEO, were all in Taj that night. It really shook up the consciousness of the company. In terms of our own kind of fallibility and I guess the impermanence of life. So till then, I had this kind of feeling that what I did was really significant, really important. But those two moments of in many ways coming some close reckoning to death and your own kind of mortality, you realize that okay, this life is dispensable as well in many ways. So So yeah, I guess like it was an angst as a 25-year-old saying like, I don't want to be a cog in the wheel. I don't want to make like sugared products or savory products for the rest of my life. I know Jobs made this pitch to John Scully, the then Pepsi chief marketing officer. Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to make a dent in the universe? So I guess my 25-year-old ego was like, oh, like I'm also making sugared products for the rest of my life. So I want to like make something more meaningful. So that was my crossover. That's the story of my crossover. I luckily found Teach for India. I was starting up, and it called out to me. It was a jump. Like I didn't know what to expect. But I made the jump, knowing very well that I was not getting something fulfilled. Though HUL is great company. So to the second part of the question, I think what I retained from HUL, which stands to this day as well, is definitely work philosophy. Like Aakanksha said, the technical skills will rub off, but the operating philosophy kind of really stays in your DNA. So of course, I went through the ranks in the factory. So we had the Japanese total productive maintenance philosophy. So that really kind of sits at you, like the commitment to kaizen. So every day, like working on 1% improvement. Every person like democratically having a share to make that 1% improvement, right? So you could be kind of the shop floor worker, which I was for a few weeks in training. So from there to a factory manager to a CEO, like everybody could do 1% on the margin, and the company could actually have like compounded returns. Like that, I think is very much like part of me, the compounding philosophy. And I think I sometimes bore my team after many years, almost 15 years, from HUL. So I keep still going back whenever we have to design a system from scratch, like the ops discipline and kind of the thinking that went into kind of designing those systems. So I bring back a lot of that, and I keep referencing that a lot. So my team does get bored when I go back to a lot of HUL, anecdotes and stories. So those two are definitely, I think, transferable. What I found much more, that I had to learn while I transitioned to the sector. And it's taken me 15 years to come to kind of this synthesis. And I recently saw, a YouTube podcast on this, which I think is a better version of my 15 years of work experience, which is between Ajay Shah and Amit Verma. They discuss this book, In Service of the Republic. And essentially, the podcast is about why running the country is not the same as running a company. So that's one big thing I had to learn over the 15 years. I had some instincts and intuition, but I didn't have the language for it. Now I think I have a better language. So, like, Ashish said, and Aakanksha referred to it as well, and you mentioned as well, Rajneesh, the feedback loops are very different. They're not instant. They're second order, third order. Things operate on a very different time horizon, 200, 300 years. Sometimes actually some of the initial events of assembly, constituent assembly discussions have a bearing today. The time horizon is extremely different. Running a company, they say, is like running an optimal cell, but running a country is like trying to run a whole body where so many things are interacting and intersectioning with each other. So the complexity is an order different. And the final thing, I think, like politics, does matter. So in I guess, I come from HUL, so you could sell a lot of Fair and Lovely and make a lot of gross margin, and never worry about the ideology of it, the morality of it, because hey, there's demand, and people want Fair and Lovely. Or hey, I can get my delivery in 5-10 minutes, so I don't need to worry about what is the dignity of that delivery, and like how much is that labor extractive or dignified. So I guess in markets, like you can kind of not worry about some difficult questions or political questions, but once you're in the development sector, like everything is right at the center, so you have to worry about each and every question, about the effect on the dignity of every individual, because that is the constitution we've all committed to, and that's a freedom that we've been endowed with. So that was a big shift, to, I guess, build those sensibilities. As an engineer, I didn't get trained enough. I did a couple of social science courses. I read Arundhati Roy's, which was off for an engineer to do at BITS Pilani. I had that inkling, that seed, but I didn't know it would all add up. So, but I had to train myself in social sciences. So I did my degree, hence in public administration, international development, to have the right way to think about how actually my best intentions can actually lead a pathway to help, and I could kind of actually do more harm to people with all my good intentions in the sector. So I was like, I think that journey of humility is something I had to learn, and I continue to learn as well. It's not as if like I've arrived with something. So yeah, that's a big difference in the sector. Yeah.
Thank you, Tarun, for sharing this really personal, wonderful journey. So, private sector experience, yes, extremely relevant, yet there is a lot more to learn, is what I'm taking out of it. We've got a range of interesting questions for both Aakanksha and Tarun coming up. So, let me, from the audience. So, this question is specifically for Aakanksha, and I'm just going to go sequentially now. If you had to go back in time, would you have moved over sooner to the social sector? Aakanksha.
That is a great question. And again, there's no right answer. Like I really feel you are ready when you feel you are ready. Um, there are many times when I've looked at young Teach for India fellows who just had that conviction from the get go and were able to actually fight the temptation of what their friends are doing or their family members are telling them to do. So I think conviction and intentionality is very key. And look, that's important for this sector, right? Because while it's moved, while the stigma is less, it's still there. And I'll share some fun anecdotes, but I know even when I was crossing over, people did ask me, oh, you're going to work for free now. Or acha, tum jhola wali banne wali ho. Or sometimes you would get these mixed slightly velvet covered comments like, oh, I wish I could just do something for fun rather than go to work. And so while that's come down, I think it's still there, right? And especially if you're already in the corporate space, momentum catches up. Folks will tell you things like, oh, but you're up for promotion. They'll show you how much money you can make a few years down the line. So I do think that really going inward and figuring out like getting in the driver's seat of your career, like I was saying, is really important. Really figuring out what you value. Look, social sector salaries have massively corrected over the last decade, even from the time that I joined, right? But most likely, will you take a haircut and over the long term, if and by the way, that's totally okay, right? People are motivated by different things. But if it's really a big pot of money or a certain financial goal you're trying to get to, then you do have to step back and assess and say, at this point, is this the right move for me? Are there financial needs that I need to take care of before I take the shift? So again, my answer always is it's the right time when you are convinced that it's the right time. I've had so much fun. I mean, I have loved every day of the last 9 years. And sometimes I do think, hey, what if I had actually moved sooner? But I think, again, there's pros and cons. I do think, to the credit of the corporate sector, the foundational skill building it does in many ways is fabulous. These are much larger organizations. I learned a lot from just working with people who were, older than me. Just very, very smart people at, BCG and Lehman and Barclays. And so I do think it gave me a certain toolkit. But there are equal number of folks, who joined way before me, therefore had an accelerated career. So again, I know this is not an answer, but the right answer is, do it whenever you're ready to jump in.
Thank you, Aakanksha. In fact, thanks for touching upon that pay point, because there was another question from the audience about how do you deal with lower pay. And you've also already talked about the correction that the sector has made in the last 10 years. And we have talked about this in detail in our report. So the question is, can the social sector pay well today? Answer is yes. But can the social sector pay equal to the private sector? The answer is no. I think that is what we have argued in our report. I'll direct the next question to Tarun, which how do you deal with situations where people do a crossover but also feel stuck in their roles in the social sector? Do you have any situations like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's not going to be a bed of roses, so I can assure you that. So, along the way, there'll be a lot of moments of self doubt, where you feel, stuck in your role, in maybe kind of in the context that you're embedded in. I think what's helped is obviously to build, a community of, friends, mentors, advisors, like always around you. So that you can get kind of candid inputs on one, how to get unstuck, of course, not just reliant on one person. That I felt like in a social sector, like delivers, more than you can imagine. In corporate sector, you have like your line manager and maybe one skip, person to kind of manage your role issues and maximum like, a peer group of, 3 to 5 people. But here, like this, I've always kind of experienced an abundance of friends, mentors, advisors. There've been many moments of stuck, but I've always, at least, I knock on Aakanksha's, door a lot of times. We're there for each other as friends many times. Archana is here. So a lot of like-minded friends and of course mentors and advisors would be my advice. And of course, try and discuss within kind of your line of sight as well with your manager, skip manager, within your locus of control as well, and see if they can help you get unstuck. But yeah, get multiple perspectives because a lot of your stuck could be because of things beyond your locus of control, and that is very natural in the sector because we want to make a lot of things happen in terms of impact, but there are things the forces of circumstance are way bigger than us. So sometimes we have to be humble to accept that the system is larger than us. Some things are beyond a locus of influence, and maybe we have to cope with the circumstances. So people around you can give you that maybe independent perspective and help navigate the situation. But the worst case is like there are plenty of options. Like you're not just stuck in that role within the organization, across organizations. So there are a lot of possibilities for movements, just like in corporate sector as well. Like you're not just stuck in a role in an organization. There's always kind of the counterfactual option available as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Tarun. I have a connecting question to that. I'd like you to address that, and then we can go to Akanksha. So, given the background of this discussion, we've also heard Ashish in his keynote talking about the fact that there's a lot of new talent management practices getting into the social sector, unlike 10 years ago. So, what kind of systems and processes have you instituted in Indus Action to help recent crossovers and recent joinees get integrated for the learning and development? Is performance measured in a certain way? If you can shed a bit of light on the talent management practices at Indus Action, it will be helpful.
No, absolutely, Rajneesh. I think we're a small organization of 60 people, so and about maybe 10, maybe 20% of our hires in our best years have been crossovers. So that's about 5 to 10 people every year, and what obviously it's an important transition for every individual, and it's an important kind of move for us as well. In a small organization, like every of 60 people, every 1 2 people like make a difference to culture, to possibilities, and these are mostly senior people coming in at middle and higher ranks. So one thing we do is right from the start of the process, as part of the process itself, we encourage at least a 1 day immersion. So in the lead up to just interviews as well, so people spend at least a day in the field, in office, like meet at least 4 or 5 different people. So it's just not being enamored by what's on website, meeting a CEO or CXOs. You spend enough time like knowing the daily mores of the organization. So that's one thing we do like almost as design that helps people like calibrate website to kind of reality check immediately. And the second thing we do as active part of the recruitment, which has helped, and is we try and set the goals together. So we have a clear idea of what we want from the role. We set kind of the default goals, but it's a shared investment process, so that kind of especially because it's crossovers, people have an idea of goal setting and have ideas about what they can achieve, cannot achieve. We bring in obviously the organizational perspective, so it is kind of a joint process in that as well. So that also helps to build investment into the role in a more specific level. The goals go into the contract. The third, which I think has been helpful, is then a 100-day plan. So the hiring manager then institutes a 100-day plan where there's a handshake for the manager to take ownership of the first 100-day experience. The goals are set, co-set, but like the first 100-day curation is done by the manager. At the end of 100-day, then we have a 2x2 handshake, where it's a 2x2 on the manager, like the new crossover on the manager as well. So strengths and weaknesses, what worked and what didn't work, and the other way around as well, so that they can have a handshake on the L&D plan for the person. And there are points where that's also a handshake to say, like, look, I think this is not working out for both of us, right? So can we find something else? To the previous question, like, hey, I'm feeling stuck. Both people feel like they're stuck with each other. So can we really recalibrate this relationship? So then it's the organization taking a broader view, saying, can we find a different role for this person? Or can we find fitness within the ecosystem? So that's then like an honest conversation as well, so that we're setting each other up for success. But after 100 days, our assumption is, like, we've done everything in each other's right to set each other up for success, the individual and the organization, and then, like, a person integrates into the rest of the talent engagement processes. So this has been the iteration. So we've done different versions of it, but this is now how the kind of funnel looks like in terms of engagement, which is kind of working well. And at some point of time in the 100 days, we give access to some of our board and advisory committees as well, so that they have a beyond organizational kind of mentorship view as well. And if they're feeling stuck along the way as well, they have kind of a balcony view of the organization and the role and situation as well. So these are the elements that go into design for a crossover person to be set up for success.
Thank you, Tarun. It was great to hear about a 100-day plan as well. We'd love to hear Aakanksha's thought on how ACT Grants approaches this thing. There's a connected question from a different member of the audience, which again, Aakanksha, you can pick up as well here. And they're asking, if somebody is crossing over to a very small NGO, how do you help them get adjusted with the lean management, completely different context? It's connected. So we'd love to hear your views as well.
No, I think they really do go together, and I wanted to speak a little bit to that. Look, I think one in the DNA of many, many impact organizations is learning and people development, right? So naturally, given it's not financial returns, and often people are really joining these organizations to solve more complex problems or to solve problems in a context that is very personal to them. And given a lot of it is fueled by young people, in general, people are very hungry to learn, and therefore there is this natural DNA, a teaching DNA, a hand-holding DNA that I've seen quite prominently in the impact space versus in the corporate space, and especially sectors like finance, where here you're just getting thrown in and there is no very intentional ongoing feedback. I think the feedback culture, reflective culture, these are very much part and parcel of the DNA of what you'll see in many organizations. Larger organizations, very similar to everything Tarun shared, like Teach for India, do have very well structured onboarding, 100-day plans, field visits, shadow programs, a lot of which, and again, they're also bifurcated. So often here's the track for a crossover, here's a track for a entry-level new person, here's a track of people who are already in the sector, right? So it'll be fairly defined, and there'll be, a very well-structured HR or organizational development team that's leading that. Having said that, I also want to just, shine some light on the fact that not all organizations are as large as a Teach for India or others. And so there are a large number of very incredible, effective organizations also, but just given the constraints, right, whether it's people, whether it's money, resources, not all organizations are able to create very well curated hand-holding programs for crossovers, right? ACT, we're a grant-giving organization, so it's not money that we struggle with, but yes, we are a small team, right? So at any given year, we're between 15 to 20 people. So then to curate, very specific programs for crossovers versus not is usually not possible. And so one thought there is that's really honestly where programs like the ILSS program come in very beautifully. Like I cannot even, emphasize enough what a huge value add that is, right? Because you are providing that initial learning and development milestone for crossovers, which is worth its weight in gold. Post that, I do, and some of this is also personal, I do feel that not everyone actually learns through hand holding or structured sessions either, right? Personally, I feel a lot of meaningful learning really happens on the job. With a thin layer of support that really ensures that you're using it and using those opportunities in the right way to learn quickly. The third thing I will say about crossovers specifically is that I feel they do come in with a very high learning orientation already, right? So again, look at the hurdles you have to go through to even make it into the sector, right? You are actually fighting the status quo a little bit. Folks like on the call, they're asking for who else can I talk to? They're asking about the program. Like they would have done a fair bit of research already. And interestingly, folks who've grown in the sector, oftentimes we find a few years in will say, oh, I think I want to explore the corporate sector because I've never worked there. Versus crossovers, because of the diligence and work, and you kind of have to have done your homework already. You would have already had a lot of calls. So there is a little bit higher learnability, I think I see with any crossovers that we've hired, which helps. And therefore, that thin layer of support, at smaller organizations like ACT that we provide is actually less focused on learning, but much more focused on unlearning, right? So what are the key areas that you need to unlearn that actually will not apply given your past ways of working? So a few that I'll quickly highlight without taking too much time. One, I think the contexts are very, very different. So the closer you can get to context, field visits on ground, even in something simple as education, depending on the socioeconomic bracket you belong to, right? People often will come in and say, yeah, but this is how we thought about education. This decision that this family is taking for their child makes no sense, right? But I think unless you get really close to ground and understand how even things like health, gender, sanitation are interacting with that education decision, you don't fully get to appreciate why behaviors are a certain way and not what comes naturally to you. And again, typically in a lot of corporate settings, depending on the sector you're working in and the economic class of customers you're working with, the decision making will be actually counterintuitive. So I think unlearning how to make decisions is a really, really big one and very contextual. So I think getting closer to context becomes really important. I think the other learning is definitely the time to gratification. It's a much more delayed sense of gratification. You don't get closure, I remember being used to, okay, yearly review done, OKRs are clear and measurable, you know how you did, and you can kind of close that chapter and feel good or bad. Versus honestly, like even 3 years into ACT, like you really have to look for the data, and often it's something else. So how do you really build that ability to find the successes yourself, because they're not going to stare at you in the face, but also get used to this delayed sense of gratification. And I think that's a big part of learning as well. The third unlearning I'll share about is just the leadership construct is completely different, right? So to really lead in a sector where market forces operate, it's competitive, right? It can be a zero-sum game. In the impact space, to lead, you have to keep expanding the pool, and therefore it's a very collaborative approach to leadership. So the typical construct of I will lead from the front, my team will follow, I will elbow competitors out, and that's how I'll win, just does not work, because in this sector, you might be leading from behind, you might be taking people along, and you really make progress when 10 other people, you go further when you go together. So I think those are maybe like the top three areas of unlearning that we really emphasize, and some of the approaches that we think about with the crossovers.
Thank you, Aakanksha. We are at time. I would really like to sincerely thank Aakanksha and Tarun once again for their valuable time and all our audience for taking part in this engaging discussion. So my apologies, there are a lot more questions, but please write into us. Happy to pick up the phone and talk to you. Thank you so much for this lovely evening. Thank you.